privilege of meeting last November while I was attending the National Council for Teachers of English conference. And Meenoo and I had the chance to talk as we were walking over to a Heinemann breakfast celebrating Donald Graves' work. And I so enjoyed the conversation I had with her, and I read her book. I was excited for her book to come out, purchased it and read it as soon as it came out. And it really touched a lot of places where I was at professionally, reminding me about why I do what I do. Trusting my own instincts and my own voice in a climate right now that tends to be very data-driven and losing the human factor. And so when I had the idea of introducing you all to her book and her ideas, she was so gracious in saying yes and doing this for us. So I'm going to turn it over to Meenoo, and let's have a great discussion. So Meenoo, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Susan. First of all, good morning. I want to thank you for letting me join your community this morning, and special thanks to Susan for forgiving me for missing a previous session and rescheduling this. I'm grateful for readers and leaders like Susan who have embraced the ideas in Thrive and have gone above and beyond and have shared the book and the ideas within it with other teachers and other coaches and pre-service teachers. The response has been incredibly humbling, and I'm honored that people are welcoming me into their learning communities in whatever ways they can. I guess I wanna start by sharing a little bit of how Thrive came to be, because that is an often asked question. And Susan, you can chime in here. Do you want me to just take questions from the Google Doc one by one and go at it? Like, is there a specific way you want to do this? Like, are there certain questions that you want me to definitely get to? Are there questions that the audience members have that we definitely want to touch upon?
Well, I'm thinking that after you kind of shared the impetus for Thrive, maybe start with the Google Doc question, and then see where we go from there. So
I think the reason I bring up how Thrive came to be, I think, is an important part of my journey with this work, because it was actually about 3 years ago at NCT, the conference that Susan just spoke of, that an editor from Heinemann approached me about writing something, and I really was baffled. I thought she wanted my feedback on like flyers for teachers or marketing material for teachers. And she said, no, like, your name has come up a lot, you're doing good work, and in a climate where most teachers are quitting, not only have you stayed, but you're doing some interesting work with your students. So what are some things you've done to make that possible? And then I rattled off a number of things, and eventually those became the 5 main ideas that are part of the 5 chapters in Thrive. And I think it's important to note that it took another person to recognize something in me, to recognize the story that was being overlooked everywhere else. And I think it's important that teachers share their stories. So I think it's important that we go public with our work. Maybe it's a professional book, maybe it's a professional blog you keep, maybe it's a journal that you keep for yourself. Maybe you go out and present in your local school and community area. I think it's really important that teachers go public with both the things that are working in their classroom and things that are challenging to them in their classroom. I think it's important that we are the ones who are telling our stories, and our stories about teaching and learning are not being shaped by politicians or policymakers who have very little experience with the work that we do every day. So I guess my small encouragement and my big invitation to you would be in what ways can you share your practice, and how do you think that might help other teachers near and far from you? Because I think, like teaching, we never know what the impact of our work will be, and I think all of you have an incredible story of the work that you do, and it's important that we talk about it. So I'm going to jump into the Google Doc and hopefully address the questions. But I hope this is a conversation and not just me talking at you the entire time. So if you want to push back, if you want clarity, if you want to give me insights on something that I'm talking about, please feel free to jump in. And I hope this is more of a dialogue rather than me just talking at you. So let me find the.
So while Meenoo's pulling up the Google Doc, as she's sharing and answering questions, if you have a question or you have a comment that you want to add, we really do want this to be a back and forth conversation and not just a talk act. So please don't be shy, and please feel free to jump in.
So the first question is very powerful, and it's asking, what would I say to someone who's never had a great role model for a long period of time for teaching their specific subject? They've seen great examples of what not to do, but they haven't seen examples of what are good practices for teaching the specific subject. And I would say that two things. I would say that the teachers who are near you or in your school, in your district, in your hometown are not the only teachers who are doing this work. So is there a community online of French teachers or Spanish teachers that you can jump into? Can you build a community like that? I run a weekly Twitter chat for English teachers around the country, really around the world. And I started that because I felt like I needed more inspiration, more ideas, and more of a role model of the practices that would benefit my students. So is there a community that already exists that you can tap into? If not, can you build one? And the second point I would make, and I made it in the book as well, I think even the people that we may not agree with on every point of our teaching and learning philosophy may have something to teach us. So I encourage, and this is more for myself rather than giving advice to anyone else, I encourage everyone to keep an open mind and have that that state of mind of curiosity and willingness to learn, and willingness to have a stance of a learner in the classroom as yourself, as you're trying to model that for your students. So even the person that you may not completely 100% agree with or may not want to model yourself after, what are they doing that you might take something from? I think there's something we can learn from each person we come across on our teaching and learning journey, and there might be something that we might be missing because our minds are closed. I don't know if there's a response to that or if that makes any sense.
Maybe just throw, I just want to throw a question out there for those for what communities have you tapped into, thinking outside of your classroom or outside of your district? Any examples of things that you're already doing that you could expand?
There are a few blogs that I follow. So that's been something that is useful for me to see. It's been something that I can check up on a regular basis, but it's not something that is dominating on I have to keep up with all the time, which can be a challenge. I think if you're trying to keep up with every community, lots of times it becomes a job, and that can be a full-time job in itself, is keeping up with all these different things. So finding a couple key blogs for me has been useful.
Can you hear okay, Meenoo? Can you hear?
A little bit. I think you asked them if they've seen examples of this type of work, and I think a gentleman said that he has followed some blogs and or plans on following them. It was a little hard to hear.
Okay. Yes. So Matt was just referencing the fact that he has found a couple of blogs to follow that have been helpful, but it doesn't feel like he has to keep up with the everyday reading of them.
Yeah, I think again, there is abundance of resources and information out there. I think sifting through it, and really this is a skill of learning in a digital space, right? We teach our kids how to sift through mountains of information. So finding that one or two connections that can sustain your practice is probably helpful rather than trying to know all of it or trying to keep up with all of it.
Anybody else? Yeah, Jill.
I could easily be isolated in my position as the only literacy teacher leader in a building. But one of the things that I've really held on to and advocated for is that across my district, that people in similar positions have weekly meetings together. Administration has responded by giving us a weekly time during the school day that we can all come together and share our experiences and get support from each other. And then in addition to that, there is some movement in the area, like Southern Maine, to bring those literacy teacher leaders across districts into somebody might be able to help me what we're calling ourselves the Southern Maine like literacy something or another. But that also is a nice avenue. So
is it the Literacy Learning Network? Is that the one you're referencing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And kudos to you for making that happen. Oftentimes, even well-meaning administrators may not fully realize what our needs are, and I think it's when teachers speak up that change comes about. So that's a great example of teacher leadership and teacher agency. And ultimately, it's not about like, hey, we just want to hang out together with people we like. Like we're trying to figure out how can we move work forward with our students. So ultimately, all of this should lead to helping our students. So that's a great example. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah. I teach English as a second language, and there isn't really anybody. There's one other person in my district who does the same thing, but I've started visiting other schools, and thankfully my district's been very generous about letting me do that. But it has really helped, and it's been very encouraging to see other practices around the state and reaffirming, just to make connections.
Yeah. So visiting other classrooms or buildings as a way of expanding your understanding.
Yeah, I mean, I'm blessed to work at Science Leadership Academy, and I can just walk down the hallway and sit in on any class and leave feeling energized and inspired, and like at least one new thing I can try the very next day in my classroom. So I think even when we go into classrooms that may not be our subject area, again, if we're like paying attention to what makes a good teacher, the way they question, the way they push reasoning, the way they help students draw their own conclusion, the way they encourage students to talk across each other and not just to the teacher. I think there are lots of ways that we're trying to figure out how to be better teachers, and we can learn that by doing that.
Any other comments or questions, or we can go to the next? Okay, I think we can go to the next one, Meenoo.
All right. So the next question was really, really good one, and this is the one that I can completely relate to. If teachers are supposed to show vulnerability, then how can we earn the respect of our students? Students will often test boundaries, especially early on. How can we deal with this while showing appropriate amount of vulnerability? And I think Uh, this is so, you know how sometimes we're told that uh, teaching is performance, and I think what I would argue is teaching is type of performance where the audience or the participants also have a role, and you're making meaning together. But if teaching is a performance where you're just putting on a show where you have everything together at all times and you have flawless like lessons. I don't think that is authentic, because no teacher in the real world actually has that. Like sometimes like we forget something, or sometimes something goes wrong, or sometimes the technology doesn't work. And I think it's in those moments of little failure when you are setting out to do something, you had a good plan, you did all the pre-work, but something still goes wrong, and you own it. You own that error, you own that mishap, you own that failure in some type, and you turn that into a teaching moment, or you turn that into a lesson. I think that's when you're showing vulnerability. I think this is hard to define. Like teacher vulnerability is really hard to define, but it's the authenticity of being a person and not just a robot teacher in front of the room who has no personal investment or personal feelings or personal attachments to the things. I think we know authenticity and vulnerability, and we know when someone is being who they are, and we're very much attracted to that. This is an idea that, as the book states, that when I write about this, I'm reflecting on the work of Brene Brown, who's a sociology professor out of Texas, and she has this amazing sentence. She says that we want people to be vulnerable with us. We want them to be real. We want them to be their true selves. But we don't want to do that with other people. And that's where the disconnect comes in. We're sorely disappointed when a relationship in our life feels inauthentic. And I think that's very much true for our students too. Um, I call students the best detectors of inauthenticity. So I think my goal when I talk about vulnerability is encouraging teachers to be brave and um, appropriately reveal the realness of their lives and the realness of and the messiness of teaching. And I think that makes that bond and the work between the teacher and the students stronger, because then it's not like I put these polished finished plans together and you execute them and that's the only relationship. I think it goes one step beyond that, where the relationship goes to we're constructing this learning experience together. You have a role in this, and I need your help too. I can't do it alone. And I think that that's what I mean by showing vulnerability. Obviously, we don't want to cross inappropriate boundaries with our students. I think we want the classroom to be a place where students and the teacher can take a risk in learning, because that's the only way real learning happens. And I don't mean share every private detail of your life inappropriately. I think it's more about the bravery you show when you try new things, and even when you fail, you keep going. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It, I personally have talked about this summer with the graduate students in particular about the importance of relationship. And I think what you just said really reinforces that piece of until there's some kind of a relationship built on trust and authenticity, we can't get to the teaching pieces that we need to get to. And taking time to establish that, I think, is so key.
I mean, when we talk about research, this is not like foo-foo, touchy-feely, like let's hold hands and feel good about this. Research shows that, when kids are at the risk of dropping out or quitting school or, leaving their education behind altogether, the number one thing that prevents that is a deep and meaningful relationship with another adult in the building. So it may happen in advisory, it may happen in your class, it may happen as a coach, but I think when students feel like they're cared for, not just cared about, I think it makes a tremendous difference. And remember, a lot of our students are coming from homes where there's a lot of stress due to maybe difficulty in economic times in the household. And I think when students feel safe, when there is structure and safety and a caring adult, that actually impacts their brain down to their brain level, where the stress of poverty can be reduced because of this relationship in the school. So this is again, like, neuroscience is saying this stuff. This is not, again, like, let's just, do this because I mean, I think we should do it because it's the right thing to do. But I think building meaningful relationship with our students is really where the work starts. And I would argue that if you know your students better, you'll teach them better, because then you'll be able to bring in their inquiries, their ideas, their questions about the world into learning. It won't be you've constructed an entire unit or an entire lesson based on the questions that you have about the world, but you know your students well enough to know their questions as well.
Any questions or thoughts around that idea of only building in a relationship? Jill.
I couldn't help but listening to what you're talking about in terms of vulnerability and how colleagues relate to each other, and that those buildings, those teams where teachers are willing to really authentically put out, here's what's working, here's what's not working, as opposed to the pony show, are so much healthier. And I'm wondering if your work is have you been working with administrators, with leadership around culture or vulnerability or anything like that?
I haven't done specific work with school communities around this idea, but I think you're giving me something to think about and something to work towards. I wrote about vulnerability because it was something that I deeply felt in my bones, that is part of teaching. Like, on one hand, teaching is a very public profession. You're on all the time. You have to have, up to 150, 160 meaningful interactions with different people. But on the other hand, it's this, like, deeply private enterprise and deeply private work too, where you're trying to bring in who you are into the work, what drives you into the work, what your students need. And there's all this, like, gray area and messiness that nobody was really talking about. And then when I read Brene Brown, things really, like, opened up to me. Things really started to make sense to me. And I started to think about the teachers and colleagues and relationships that really exemplified a sense of honesty and a sense of being truly present in the classroom, and that's what I tried to articulate in the book. But I would say, of all the chapters in the book, the one chapter that everyone wants to talk about privately, just like one-on-one, is the teacher vulnerability part. I can't tell you how many teachers have come up to me quietly after speaking engagements or conferences and have said, like, that really meant a lot to me. Like, it really hit a note with me. I felt that way, or I think that way, but nobody was articulating this.
Any other thoughts or questions around that idea?
Susan,
Yes.
I just think, as a kindergarten teacher, you know, it's their first experience with school, and a lot of times the kids, it really sets the tone. So I try really hard to make sure they know it's okay to take risks and make mistakes. And one of the things, you know, we work on relationship building, and by the end of the year, it's almost like a funny joke in the class. If Miss Shaw makes a mistake, and the kids will say, oh, well, everyone makes mistakes, it's okay. And it's kind of, I'm trying, and they're usually very natural. You know, mistakes happen, things come up, whatever, changes in routines come up, things like that. And, or, oh, she forgot to post the schedule, oh, silly Miss Shaw. But that, just to teach them it's okay, you know, when we're doing some writing together and that kind of thing. And I really think it's important, especially at the younger grades, when instead of just always, okay, this is how you do it, this is how you do it, as we're teaching them the foundations, to make sure we're also teaching them it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to take risks, and what we learn from them. Mm-hmm. And I think it's powerful, and kind of how to get that across the board. You know, some classrooms are very much perfectionism and that sort of thing, and how to get that message out to everyone in elementary too.
I think you hit on a key point. I think I say this in the book, like, what student is going to say I don't get it, or I don't understand, or I need help, when they've never seen their teacher do the same thing. So, like, I think we have to model lifelong learning, and I think one of those key steps in that lifelong learning process is to not be ashamed to say, I don't understand, or I need help, or I need you to be here for me. And I think when we go to that slightly uncomfortable place, or more uncomfortable for others than some, then our students are willing to go there. And I loved the fact that a kindergarten teacher said that she does this, because it really, you know, it goes from early childhood to adulthood. I think we're all trying to get to a point in our personal and professional relationships where we can say, hey, I need help. And I think if we were all willing to do that a little bit more, we can all help each other out a little bit more. And again, I think this could only benefit our students.
Absolutely. So maybe this can lead us into the next part about personal voice.
Yes. Trying to find the personal voice question.
So it's
okay. Yeah, when I began teaching, I had a really hard time finding my personal voice to listen amid all the noise of the newness. Do you have a recommendation for first identifying one's voice and sense of place within the structure and the complex personal relationship? This is an amazing question. You guys are like models for asking deep and complex questions. So I think when you don't know what you value as a teacher, I think it can be really hard to be the teacher you have to be for your students. So I think when you, and this was very much my experience. You know, I'm going into my eighth year of teaching, so I'm a new teacher if we're talking about a long trajectory of career. But in my first couple of years of teaching, you know, like you get a binder that's about big as your head, full of like requirements, and then you have 3 different people immediately telling you to do 3 different ways to do your job. You have your own ideas, and you vaguely remember something from your education classes about what to do and what not to do. You've read a couple of professional books, and they all say something different. And I think it can be really hard to figure out who you are and I love the way you put it, in all that noise and the noise of newness. I think it's so important that you write during your teaching journey, and you can do this when your students are journaling. Like, it doesn't matter if you're teaching kindergarten or you're teaching 12th grade. When your students are writing, I think it's so important that you as teacher are writing alongside them. You may choose to do the prompts that they're doing, or you may take a moment, like bring stillness to the classroom, bring reverence to the classroom, and you might just capture, what are you thinking? What puzzles you? What challenges you? What's going well? What's not going well? And I think if you keep a regular practice of writing about your experience in the classroom, you'll find your way to your answers. But I think if you don't bring that stillness to your life when your life is so chaotic and you have 160 some papers to grade and 160 different kids to deal with every single day, I think you'll lose yourself and you'll just start to listen to other people's ideas instead of listening to your own ideas. So one concrete thing I would say is, to find your voice, you have to write. I think it's so important to write about your practice. You can do it every day, that'd be amazing. You can do it a couple of times a week, but somewhere you should have a teaching journal that's part of your practice. And it's kind of amazing to go back and look at the plans you were making, the ideas that you had years later, and have this like rich record of your teaching career. I think it's amazing.
That really makes me think about the importance of reflection and being vigilant about making the time to be reflective. Often, I know in my own practice, oftentimes I'm so caught up in making sure that I've covered the material but I have to really make myself stop and think about, okay, what went well? What would I have done differently? And really reflecting on the practice of teaching. I think if we don't do that we, as you've already said, we begin to lose ourselves.
Yeah, and I think reflection has become this like rote thing, like it's part of, teacher evaluations, and it's part of like, end of PD, you're asked to reflect. But I mean like in your classroom, like alongside your students or before you go to bed. I think you have to have like some private writing space where you can even like share things that you're not ready to share with a colleague, or you're not ready to share with your professional learning network. I think we find our way to our answers by keeping our questions close by and paying attention to them. So I think writing about it and then like letting go of it for a little while, and not carrying the burden of having those questions, but not having them put them anywhere, can also give you some answers. I think we carry around enough information as a teacher. Like, you have to remember to take attendance. You have to remember to let Johnny go to the nurse at 8:07. You have to remember to call that parent. You have to remember that you need to ask your principal for permission to do this, and you need to make sure that the bus is on time for the after school. Like, I think the number of things, if you like at 8 o'clock in the morning or 7:45 in the morning, like how many things are in your mind that you have to remember. And I think when your brain is stressed that much with just that kind of load, I think you have to have a place where you bring some like I said, some silence and some reverence, where you're able to just write and reflect.
Mm-hmm. Thoughts or ideas, questions around? So, Meenoo, I'm looking at the time, and we have about 20 minutes left.
Okay.
So I know one thing I would really like for you to address is the question around the standardized testing. It's the 5th question down on the document.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's the Rita Sorrentino questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Here in Maine, we have, just so you have a little background, we are very driven by the standardized testing, and we have a governor who has developed this really ridiculous report card system. So each
Yeah.
school is given a grade based
Right.
on a standardized test. And so just maybe around that whole idea of
So
staying authentic.
So I think accountability it is the trend and the cool thing to do, and like everybody wants to be harder than the person before them, and I can't even get into the marriage between the accountability movement and the people who are making money off of it, the testing companies that are making money off of it. But again, I am a public, servant. Like I work in a public school in Philadelphia. I'm beholden to um, like you are, the standards and the expectations and the accountability expectations by politicians, policymakers, parents. But ultimately, this is how I make sense of it, because I'm a full-time classroom teacher. I face the same challenges as an instructor, as an educator, and this is how I make sense of it. First and foremost, um, my stakeholders are my students. Like, yes, the policymakers, the politicians, the parents, community members, everybody has a say in what my job is and how I should do my job, and what's going right and what's going wrong. And I may even get a grade, and in Los Angeles they even publish the scores of teachers and all this craziness, and all of that might happen to me. But first and foremost, my I am beholden to my students above any other single group. So that's number one. And so that means I have to align what's good for my students, or what I think is best for my students, with the circumstances around standardized testing. And I think if we go back to the ideas that we know that work for our students, when we help them become lifelong readers, when we help them become better writers by giving them chance to write about their lives, about things that they're curious about, I think we actually see that we can align the best practices that we want to do for our students with achieving the scores that we want. I would argue that when you put a student, a kid, in front of a computer program for 3 hours, and you say, do this kill and drill session until you get this, and that's going to improve your score, I think that actually will probably not only not improve the score, but bring the score down. But I think if you put an energized, empowered, thoughtful, connected, um, a teacher who's able to relate and connect to the students who are in front of her, I think you can see that those practices that we know work and are good for our students, lots of reading, lots of writing, lots of conversations across students and not just with the teacher, I think those practices will ultimately improve our students' scores, no matter what the test, no matter what the state. And I think if we think that there is some magic program, some magic formula of how to raise our kids' ability, and my field is English, so I'm always thinking of reading, writing, and thinking. But no matter what the skill is, the more experience they have working on that skill alongside an expert educator, the better off they're going to be at mastering it. So I would say resist the seductive temptation, marketing of glossy read 180 packages, whatever packages that are being thrown at you, and show that your students can actually outperform those initiatives by doing the things that you know work best for them. And I think this movement is bigger than just us. Open any or Google any Google, like parent resistance to standardized testing. Just like there's an underground swell of teachers who are like, this is not good for my students. I think there's an underground swell of parents who are catching on and are resisting this standardized testing movement. And this is a long game, and the pendulum will swing back and forth. But I think all of those things are outside of the classroom. I still have to get up in every morning in front of 33 sleepy teenagers and do the work that I'm set out to do. So that's how I make sense of the standardization and the testing movement that has taken over over our work.
Yeah, Jen.
What do you do, you have special ed, the people that are learning disabled and they attend special ed for maybe 1 or 2 hours. They're going to there and they're doing computer programs where they're sitting in front of a computer with no human interaction, and those are the kids that need it the most. As a teacher, I say, well, I'm going to keep them in my class. You have to advocate for them. So a lot of times I'll keep them in my classroom and have special ed come into me. But how do you change their way of thinking that those are the most at-risk students and they need the most human attention?
Susan, could you repeat the question? Is the question about how special ed students' needs are being met?
Yeah, it's around that idea of our students who need the most human interaction and best practices, what we know to be best practices, are often those students who are pulled out and
Right.
put in front of computers, and what are some ideas for helping to change that mindset in advocacy for those students?
I think depending on the level and the appropriate grade level for the students, I think we need to empower our students to be advocates for themselves. And then I think we need to empower our parents. I think we need to inform our parents and empower them to know what their rights are. Like I don't know the ins and outs of your state's special ed laws, but I think the least restrictive environment has to be part of the equation of the type of learning setting that a student gets. So I think our very own students can be advocates for themselves, because you might have them for a year or you might have them for 2 years, but if they learn in different ways, they're going to have to advocate for themselves lifelong, whether they're in a career, whether they're at their job, whether they're in college. They're going to have to constantly advocate for themselves. So I think we need to empower our students to be able to do that. And again, this might sound very heady and idealistic, but I can't imagine what other avenues there are if the very people, like the so-called people who are in charge of our students and who make decisions above us, are making these kinds of decisions. And if we have to work within that system, I think we have to take all kinds of creative ideas into account and strive to do better. And I love the teacher who said, I go above my call of duty and I keep them for extra time, or I keep them with me. I think that's incredibly honorable, and I think this is what I love about teachers. They will do anything to help the students in their care, but I think we need our parents' help too.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm also thinking about, what Jen said about that she tries to keep her kids with her, and that idea that you hit on earlier about writing and really documenting the student in action, working under those best practices. Um, Looking beyond the test score, looking beyond the number, and really highlighting and celebrating what the student can do and how they're reacting to the instructional strategies that you're using within your classroom. I'm one of those people that when they say you can't do it that way, I'm finding a way to show them, oh yes, you can. And a lot of times it is. Invite them in to see what's going on. The documentation, grabbing that video camera and recording that kid as they're working. And especially capturing the engagement piece, I think. Because when kids are motivated and engaged, they can do a lot of things that we sometimes think they can't do, just because of motivation and engagement. So,
And being in an environment with children that are achievers.
Yes.
So they're comparing themselves to high achieving, and they can do that. I
Right.
can do what my neighbor's doing,
right.
and and instead of working down, reaching
Yes.
up.
I do. I think we do a big disservice to our students and our teachers when we create classrooms of very similar like learners, because you squelch the diversity and the ideas and the creativity sometimes because there aren't peer models, and I don't think that we can discount that. I think that's important. So, any other ideas around that? Or Meenoo, did you have a follow-up to that?
And no, I don't have anything additional to say. I think you added a lot more depth to my answer, so thank you.
So we have about 6 minutes left. So is there anything that's really burning in your head that we haven't gotten to that you'd like to address with me now? Jana.
I'm just interested, if I came into the school that you work at, can you describe to me the presence you have in your school, not in your classroom, but in your school, and how do you think that compares with the sort of prolific kind of impact you're having with your book and online?
Fortunately, I work with an incredible group of educators at Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia. I'm like, the fourth most impressive teacher in my hallway. My boss, my principal, Chris Lehman, is an incredible role model. He very much does this sort of work about changing the conversation about teaching and practice. I think last week he was in Boston and he was in Jeffersonville, Indiana. So I see us, our little school in Philly. We're a public school within the school district of Philadelphia under the same constraints, and if you haven't looked into Philly's budget crisis, you really should. We're facing massive cuts and massive layoffs year after year. I think I'm incredibly proud and humbled to get a chance to work with a group of educators who deeply believe in this type of learning that's inquiry driven, project based, where students are empowered to do this kind of learning, and they're driven to take this message widely. So something amazing about our school is the distributive leadership model, where we all own a piece of our school, whether you run a conference like EduCon, like I do, whether you write grants like alongside me, a couple of other colleagues of mine, we're always writing grants to raise funds. As I said, we're facing massive budget cuts every year. Whether it's my principal who's like doing all of these things and so much more, whether people are running Saturday detention or planning prom, we all own a piece of the school, and it's not, we're not waiting for our boss to figure out a solution for the things that that our school and our students need. And I think it really comes from a leader like Chris Lehman, who empowers his students and his teachers to own the running of a school on a shoestring, on a less than a shoestring budget. So we have 500 teachers, about 27 staff members, and we have one secretary. We have no assistant principals. We don't even have a librarian. I don't have any special presence in my school. I just feel very lucky to get a chance to work with my colleagues. You know, they know that I do some of these things outside of school. They're incredibly supportive. My students know that I do some of these things. My students like know about the book. They're proud of me. And they actually know that I'm an ambassador for their work, that when I go out and talk about powerful practices in the classroom, I'm really able to do that because of the work that we're doing together. And they're very much aware of the impact that they're making in other classrooms, because we're sharing our practice publicly. So I'm really fortunate. So.
Meenoo, can I have a follow-up question with that?
Sure.
Do teachers at your school make a choice to come to that school, or was it just, you know?
No, it's a very it's a rigorous process. I think you asked about teachers, and I'm going to answer that one unless you asked about something else. The teachers have to apply, and then the interview is conducted by a committee made up of my boss, the principal, few faculty members, usually from that department, or not, depending on who's available, a student, a parent, sometimes a community member, and it's a full consensus hire. So even if you know the principal wants a teacher, but the other committee members say no, we don't go for it. Yeah, I was really nervous when I interviewed, because I knew this was a phenomenal school, and I was following their work online.
Anybody else? Melissa.
Just to go along with what you were saying about instructional leadership at your school, at my school, we're moving from a building leadership team to an instructional leadership team this year. It's a volunteer committee, and it's a good, like I said, it's going to be our first year doing this. It's a K-5 school, so it's a little bit younger than you, but I'm just wondering if you have any advice for first steps, like with this, again.
I think with any new initiative in school, and especially relating to leadership, I think it's so important that people are willing to believe in the best intention of everyone else that's working together. I think sometimes we can let our egos or our personality traits get in the way of the work. And I think if we ultimately keep this question in mind, how will this affect our students? I think that brings a lot of clarity to school-wide decision-making process. I think oftentimes we talk about how decisions affect the adults in the building, but we sometimes forget to think about how decisions affect students in the building. And I think whether you're changing a classroom practice, or you're making a policy school-wide, or you're forming a new initiative or a new leadership committee, I think I would even like write that question really big on a chart paper, or on some large display. How will this affect students? Because I think if we keep students at the center of our decision-making process, then I think a whole lot of clarity comes that has nothing to do with egos or personalities or power play.
Meenoo, do you have any like closing comments that you would like to share with us?
No, I just wanna sincerely thank you. If you read the book, if you liked what you read, if you wanna share your review on Amazon or on your blog, and like tweet me a link or email me a link. Susan has all of my contact information, and you can reach me if you have thoughts after this conversation that you want to share with me. I love hearing from people who do the work that I love doing. So I guess my only thought is, let's stay in touch, and let's help each other grow.
Absolutely. And I want to encourage you, if you're on Facebook, there is a Facebook group happening right now around Meenoo's book that's being run by a friend of mine, John, in Utah. And there's great discussions happening there. So that's another place. Absolutely, if you're on Twitter. I've convinced some of them, I'm still working on them.
Yeah, I would say follow and tweet to me, and I'll follow you back so we can stay in touch.
And there's lots of conversation happening around the ideas that Meenoo has talked with us about today. That's really the way to build your professional learning network, and to really find people who will challenge you and help you to refine who you are as a teacher and as an educator. So, Meenoo, again, I just want to say thank you so much for giving us some time today, and for sharing your ideas and your work with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time, and thanks for letting me be part of your learning community this morning.
You're welcome. I'll follow up with you later. I'd like to process this with you.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thanks, Meenoo. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.